Imagine living in a world full of people who have not yet anywhere ran an experiment that showed that vaccinating saves lives, reduces the mortality. No one has done this in this world. And yet, imagine that the majority of these people in this hypothetical world get together and say, we want to have those people who aren't being vaccinated punished because they are bringing us down. They're making us as a whole sicker. They're bringing in disease-causing organisms. No one has ever made a reenactment of a real-life scenario and measured the mortality rate to be decreased for the vaccinated humans. And if they have, you would want to ask, hey, can I please read your experimental report? I want to read the details of the report, not just that you vaccinated some people and not others and you notice that they died more than the others, or vice versa. We want to see, for example, a cow paddock with a herd of cows, exactly the same strain of cows, or even numbers of bigger and smaller cows, fitter and less fit cows, healthy and sick cows, and we want to see that the 400 vaccinated cows had a significantly lower mortality rate than the 400 unvaccinated cows. Imagine living in a world that hasn't done anything like this. They've just taken results of cows, readings of cows, and then gone and said, hey, look, we've lowered this diagnosis. These cows didn't get this diagnosis, and we were trying to lower this diagnosis. What about death? What about disease and all that? This diagnosis, are you worried about it? You are, aren't you? We can lower it. Shut up. Imagine living in that world and then having everyone around you telling you when you're asking them to run this experiment and lower mortality with the product that we are calling life-saving. Imagine them telling you, hey, we've done enough. We want you to get vaccinated even if you can't understand it. And if you don't, we want you to pay us money, or we don't want to allow you to have certain access to certain facilities or functions or abilities.
What you talking about? I don't want to talk. Won't speak on that, I'm too official.
What's a virus?
So what they did here, they took a monolayer of cells and they infected them with vaccinia virus, which is a pox virus related to smallpox virus. And then they incubated for a while, and then they looked where there was the beginning of a plaque, and then they put the camera on the microscope over, and they did time lapse. They took a frame every minute or so, and this goes up to many hours, as you'll see on the counter. And so this is a time lapse photograph, and watch. You see the plaque is getting bigger and bigger as the cells are dying. It's like, how did that go? 15 hours or so it went up to? Yeah. So it took 15 hours of time lapsing, but that's how a plaque develops. And you can see the cells are becoming what we call refractory to light. They're no longer transmitting the light of the microscope. They become shiny, and that's part of the cytopathic effect. They're also detaching. The hole is getting bigger. I think this is amazing.
We have a lawn, a patch of cells, and a bit of poison, a bit of material has been plopped on this lawn in one spot, and it has shattered the chemistry of these cells, evidently. And the poison travels through the cells as it shatters their chemistry, most of them, and it's like a kind of like a domino or wildfire effect, starting from the middle from wherever the poison or the antigenic material was inserted. All we have demonstrated here is that this patch of cells has been compromised by the addition of some materials that have broken the chemistry of the healthy cells, and it is spread through the cells.
In my opinion, this is the greatest movie ever made.
They think I'm dumb, you got me up, I got plenty knowledge.
High Court et al. In the United States presented such tissue breakdown images in their papers as evidence of the alleged virus. Stefan cell culture experiments were performed without the addition of any sample claimed to contain any viruses. It was shown that cytopathic effects depicted by the white arrows were induced simply by stressing the cells with passaging and antibiotics. Cytopathic effects depicted by the white arrows were induced simply by stressing the cells with passaging and antibiotics.
One more time.
Cytopathic effects depicted by the white arrows were induced simply by stressing the cells with passaging and antibiotics. The addition of yeast RNA, shown in the fourth column, induced even more cytopathic effects. It confirmed what had been suspected since John Ender's 1954 measles experiment.
One more time.
Cytopathic effects are non-specific and do not require the existence of viruses.
Oh yeah, all right.
With regard to the phase 2 experiment, we can hand over to Stefan to explain what was done.
This is a good moment to give a shout out to Doctors Sam and Zach Bailey, the partners who are working together in this field. They haven't, or nobody really has, put out a video about the whole enchilada of the alleged virus delusion, or even perhaps the germ-theory delusion. Dr. Sam Bailey has put out many videos about many different things, including small penis syndrome. It appears as though this is a job cut for a very refined, specific niche individual. Perhaps myself, I, like I said, appear to be the only one putting out the whole enchilada of this situation on YouTube. Dr. Sam Bailey has made a video about the whole thing, but it is on Odyssey and other places, not fit for YouTube apparently. Take this context for the upcoming discussion. Stefan Lanka is about to tell us what has occurred in some of his experimentation, whereby they had healthy human tissue, pathogen-free, and they did something to it. He said they did something 12 times to it in a strict scientific manner, and they eventuated with some material that gives off just as close a reading or closer to anything else that has been considered a specific virus. They found this same kind of virus reading from the PCR reading. They found the virus just as easy as anyone can find the virus with the PCR, but they didn't have the virus. They had materials that eventuated from specifically treated human tissue in a controlled scientific environment. His cells in Dr. Lanka's experiment had been multiplied 12 times. They had been divided 12 times under, I'm not sure what the conditions were exactly, but there was no addition of coronavirus or any virus. All of the viruses that have been alleged to cause disease in humans, out of all of them, not one of them has ever been found from a human, from any of the liquids of a human or animal, and not one of them has been biochemically analysed in its entirety.
Real shit, bro.
Not one of them has even been isolated by itself, biochemically analysed.
That's just real shit, man.
Anytime we profile a new disease-causing virus, we are taking readings from
billions of small genetic debris
and constructing one large one. Anytime we see a photo of a virus, it is from billions of particles that have resulted in the breakdown of cells. You cannot find a complete genome of a virus from one particle that has allegedly caused any animal or human disease.
Second phase of the experiment, we took the nucleic acid out of the healthy human tissue, we multiplied them, and when we multiply them in a very strict scientific manner, that means only 12 times, we'll get 20% of the genome of SARS-CoV-2. And when we use 30 cycles, which is considered in biochemistry as already dirty and not scientific, we'll get, when we use the same error rate like biologists are using, we'll get 100% of the genome. And biologists, can you imagine, they are using 40 to 45 cycles. And what they are using, they add to the cells a lot of synthesized small molecules with given sequence, such a high amount that they add already 20% of the sequences later they are reading as a this is part of the notes. And this is what the control experiment in the second phase were showing, that all this, what they are saying is the genetic material of a virus comes out of normal human tissue. It's nothing specific for something which comes from the outside. It's pure human sequences, and we use the same techniques biologists are using, and we'll get the same result.
Phase 3 of the experiment was titled Structural Analysis of Sequence Data in Virology. The full report is very technical, so Mark summarised the main findings earlier this year in his article, Doe Ex Machina and the Invention of SARS-CoV-2.
The third phase of these experiments, directed by Dr. Stefan Lanka, was to show that there's surely, most definitely, nothing special or specific about the original alignment of any of the allegedly disease-causing viruses, i.e. we align the template-based genome of some materials that have resulted from a concoction of materials which had included in it human samples which allegedly contained an allegedly new disease-causing virus.
So, Gandalf, you tried to lead them over Garadras. And if that fails, where then will you go?
What would you say is the magic moment along that line? I saw it was 1 or 2 billion, maybe 3 billion years it took to go from bacteria to like complex organism. Like, it seems like Earth had a very long time, like not a very long time without life, and then a very long time with very primitive life. Maybe I'm discriminating calling bacteria primitive life.
Yeah,
but
people would object to you doing that for sure.
But it seems like complex organism, when it starts becoming something like, I don't know what's a good, not animal-like, but more complexity than just like a single cell. What do you think is the magic there? What's the hardest thing? If you were trying to engineer Earth and build life and build the simulations, obviously we're living in a video game, what this is. So if you're trying to build this video, what's the hardest part along this evolution pathway?
So bacteria, are mostly single cells. They do make colonies. They get together in biofilms, which are really important, but they're all single bacteria in that. And the key is making an organism where cells do different things. We have skin cells and eye cells and brain cells. Bacteria never do that. And the reason is probably energy. Bacteria can't make enough energy to do that. And so there was...
You can see here, this is Vincent Racaniello. He is also a PhD virologist. He's like the most popular virologist on YouTube. He was even before the coronavirus thing. You can watch this video to confirm, if you don't believe me, that he's asked what the most magical moment in biology is on Earth. Out of all of this, and you can also confirm too that Vince and Lex do not mention at all that someone like Dr. Stefan Lanka exists and what he is contending, which is kind of embarrassing for our culture. A planet and then multicellular organisms like us walking around. Where's the most magical point in the process? And Vincent Racaniello goes on to say that it was when bacteria formed together to become an organism, to do various different things as the one organized unit. And he somehow thinks that this is more magical than the moment a piece of material, let's call it genetic material, because he does, RNA, somehow just becomes cloned by the material itself. Somehow, along this line of billions of years, from dust to us, there's this material called genetic that is copied. And how's it going to do that? It's going to have to get the materials from elsewhere to make more of itself. So it catalyzes, it stimulates the materials around it to create another version of itself. Where is this coming from? He's trying to say that this is the first form of life, is this bit of material that started copying itself. Why did it copy itself? Why wasn't it created by the whole concoction of materials that it's allegedly influencing to create more of itself? He kind of neglects the real magic here and says actually it's when bacteria form together like the mitochondria. Clearly, the magic moment is a genetic material is presented on Earth and it's copied, replicated somehow.
If the mountain defeats you, will you risk a more dangerous road?
There is a fell voice on the air.
Moria!
Viruses were probably the first organic entities to evolve on the planet. Long ago, billion years ago, just as the Earth cooled and organic molecules began to form. I think we call them self-replicators. They're just short things that today would look like RNA, which is the basis of many viruses, right? They evolved and they were able to replicate. Of course, they were just naked molecules. They had no protection. And it was just RNA based. And that's tough because RNA is pretty fragile in the world. And it probably didn't get very big as a consequence. But then proteins evolved, and I'm skipping like hundreds of millions of years of evolution.
He skips the part in his story where he says, we go from what I'm calling magical, the magic of genetic material appearing on Earth and being copied, to this material forming kind of cells, to the materials that were originally just being copied coming along to infect the cells which this material turned into. So this material based genetic replicating, randomly replicating seemingly material starts off just magically replicating, as I've said, but Vince says that mitochondria is more magic than the appearance of this. And then it eventuates into a kind of cell, and it's still there, all these different base forms. It manages to not only catalyze the outside elements all around it, the materials in its environment to recreate itself, it now is managing to catalyze the thing that it turned into, this pre-cellular or cellular conglomeration of material, genetic material. The thing that turned into this is now learning to infect this. And as this evolves more and more, this keeps evolving, and basically there's just...
Proteins evolved, maybe without a cell, maybe with a cell. But then to make a cell, there probably were some RNA-based cells early on, but they were pretty simple.
Fear to go into those minds. The dwarves delved too greedily and too deep. You know what they awoke in the darkness of Khazad-dûm.
I go to war with any nigga.
These viruses, when humans have gathered materials and said this is what we believe contains disease-causing viruses, and put them inside the veins of dogs or drip them down the noses of humans for an unusual amount of time, something you can never find in nature. These alleged disease-causing viruses, they have done just the same kind of thing as fungus and bacteria in terms of transmitting disease. We can cause disease to humans, any animal, with microbes that we think cause disease and that we don't, simply by getting enough of them and putting them in places that they will never be found in such quantities in nature. Therefore, our body, any animal's body, has not evolved the capacity to deal with them. For example, putting a heap of these viruses or anything inside a dog's vein and then saying, look, we think we've found a disease-causing microbe, that is not actually the same thing to say, because that's not a reenactment of nature. In nature, allegedly, we get a bit of genetic material and it mass reproduces inside us, and that's the end of it. Now, we can't find this in experiment. And in fact, if this was the case, as far as I can see, with my calculator in my head, there would be no biology on Earth. It is impossible. If there are these things that are simply there to use other cells so that they are mass reproduced, so the cells do all of the work, these things do absolutely nothing. Apparently they're existing, even bacteria, even fungus, and they do things. Apparently there exists fungus or bacteria in reality that will make a healthy organism sick by the acquisition of its spore. And yet nowhere in controlled experiments, can I find a reenactment of nature whereby we have introduced a spore of a bacteria or a fungus and pronounced disease transmission or disease genesis, specifically disease associated with that fungus or bacteria spore that we put into the experiment and that we have noted to be in association with a specific disease condition. We should be able to recreate that same specific disease condition for the host by bringing along a spore. Nobody can do this. I've searched and searched fungus experiments, bacteria experiments, and that's why no one's really stopped to notice that, hey, maybe these viruses aren't even self-replicating organisms, because they've been so small to really see, and we've just imagined that they are the cause of this synchronized disease character and timing where we can't find bacteria or fungus. We've imagined that, well, if it's not a bacteria or fungus, it must be this thing. It's too small for us to see. We've carried it along simply because it does the same thing as bacteria and fungus. We're on the same delusion that we've always been on, if we are truly deluded, which is this idea that there are material packages that will self-replicate or be mass-propagated, mass-produced within or on us, and be the immediate direct cause of our destruction, demise, degeneration, death. This belief, which has never been, in my opinion, demonstrated in controlled experiment. Like I said, people have taken these particles or microbes, brought them together and put them inside some dog's veins and said, look, death occurred. People believe these microbes cause death. There's something. People have done that, which is quite embarrassing if you're one of the people in this culture who is getting around saying, look, we have demonstrated our belief. Personally, that's how I feel. Now imagine there is this thing like a disease-causing microbe, like a package of material that will be taken in by the body and mass-produced. As the body is mass-producing it, the body also kills itself. Or this thing lands on the body and on a healthy body and just mass-produces itself and kills the body in the process. Regardless of the controlled experiments, just try to imagine, how is life going to get started with this scenario, with these dynamic? They're going to have to come up with a law like the public goods theory postulates, that all the cells get together and say, let's somehow make it so that the cells that infect us don't infect us too much, because otherwise they won't have anything to infect. So maybe we can convince them, if we can teach them this, that if there's no cells left to infect, they won't even be able to exist. But apparently it's all blind evolution anyway. Somehow we've established this mystical bone that fits part of this germ-theory skeleton, contagion skeleton. Apparently the viruses, the bacteria, the fungus, they will take evolutionary turns that will have them killing larger organisms which evolve much slower than them and reproduce much, much slower than them. Well, that kind of works into the same thing. Why they evolve much slower is because they reproduce much slower. These microbes would just keep having babies, and the ones that had better ability to infect and be disseminated and infect more and more, there's going to be a channel fashioning out the most virulent, savage, infectious microbes of them all, because they're going to have the most babies, they're going to have the most drive. Out of all the microbes babies, these savage ones, there's going to be another selection of all the babies. Which one's the most savage? That one is going to generally have the most babies and cause the most destruction. And its babies, the more destruction it causes, the the more babies it's going to have. And its babies are going to be selected too. Who's the most savage? Which one can infect hippopotamus and rhino? There's one there. Ooh, boom, all the hippos and rhinos are dead. And those babies, all those generations just kept getting more and more savage. And then there's no life left because all of a sudden one day this actually happened, that there was a piece of material on Earth that is taken in by cells and mass reproduced arbitrarily as the cells are destroyed, and the material evolves slightly different, and it eventually makes its way around to sporting a form that can infect every kind of cell on Earth. You see, this would be a reality, this map, but what happens, my dear Squire, is the evolving infectious material does what the cells tell it to do in terms of how, where and when to evolve via a mystical force. The microbes don't just get around ravaging all the cells, evolving in every possible way that is most reproducible, because their ancestors did that, and well, they eventually wanted to get some sports cars and some better luxuries, some more multicellular organisms, so they cooperated and said, stop going so hard on the cells, stop just destroying them. They've actually made a little system where they only destroy them a little bit. This way they can have big high-rise buildings like us. Yeah, it's all computer models. It's not mysticism. We've made it work on the computer models. We've said, this must be working, and we've made it work. The computer did it. The computer said, yes, that's all we need. It's not even mysticism. It is invoking the force of mysticism to say that microbes have an evolutionary obstacle in the form of foresight, microbial foresight.
Dead giveaway.
Yeah, that's a space peanut.
No, probably not. This is a big old frozen chunk of poopy.
Dude, you were eating off it.